My name is Hazel Whitmore. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how I was erased from my own family, until I turned their betrayal into their reckoning. It started in a house so large, I used to get lost in it as a child. A sprawling, ivy-covered mansion in Lakewood, Washington. Whitmore House. My childhood home. A place with gleaming marble floors, antique staircases, and a grandfather clock that ticked like the heartbeat of the family legacy. But no matter how beautiful the chandeliers were or how many oil portraits hung on the walls, I always knew something was off. I was the quiet one. The second daughter. The spare. My sister, Fiona, was 3 years older, tall, stunning, magnetic. The kind of girl whose smile made adults hand her gifts for no reason, who won every school competition even when she barely tried. And then there was me, always in the background, the one who was expected to clap and nod and disappear when the spotlight came out. I remember Fiona's 16th birthday like it was yesterday. My dad unveiled a brand new Mercedes GLC in the driveway, wrapped in a red ribbon. Everyone clapped. I stood off to the side, clutching the small white envelope in my hands. Inside was a $50 Target gift card. "You don't need a car," Dad said to me when I asked. "It's not like you go anywhere." "Fiona needs it for her tutoring and social events," Mom chimed in, not looking up from her phone. "You should be happy for your sister." Happy for my sister. That was the refrain of my life. Even when she stole the dress I'd sewn myself. Even when she spilled red wine on it and returned it like nothing had happened. When I cried, my mother waved her hand and said, "Wasn't that dress old anyway?" It didn't matter that I'd worked after school shifts for months just to afford the fabric. But what hurt the most wasn't the dress or the car or the silence. It was what happened the year I applied to Columbia. I'd spent all summer pouring my heart into that application. I wrote about my dream to build a non-profit teaching tech skills to underprivileged kids in Appalachia. I told the story of how I volunteered at summer camps and taught kids how to code using borrowed laptops. I even had the name picked out, Bright Future. Then one night I opened Fiona's laptop by mistake. Her essay for NYU was open. Same non-profit name. Same camp story. Same dream. She had stolen it, word for word. When I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. She just smiled. "Borrowed a little inspiration," she said. "You're applying to different schools anyway." I screamed. I broke down, one of the few times in my life I truly lost control. My father stood up from his armchair, looked at me like I was a feral animal, and said, "Hazel, you're being petty. You need to learn to share. Family is about growing together." That was the moment everything crystallized for me. I was the insurance policy. The backup plan. Fiona was the investment. But there was one person in that house who never saw me as second place, my grandfather, Walter Whitmore. He lived in the west wing of the mansion, in a library that smelled like cedar and old leather. The fireplace was always burning, and the walls were lined with books that towered higher than I could reach. Every afternoon, I'd sit with him. Even if it was just 15 minutes. He'd look up from his newspaper and smile. "My Hazel is home. What did you learn today?" And I would tell him everything, about philosophy class, how I hated gym, how Fiona had once again taken credit for something I did. He listened. He always listened. When I turned 17, he started teaching me how to read financial statements. How to understand value chains. How to lead teams. "Fiona speaks well," he'd say, "but you understand structure." I didn't realize it then, but he was preparing me. Not just for business. For war. When I was 25, the call came. It was a snowy night. The doctor's voice on the phone was low and urgent. "Your grandfather has been admitted to the ICU. He never made it home." 3 days after the funeral, we all gathered in his library, the place where I had once felt safe. Now it felt like a courtroom. My parents sat at the front. Fiona was off to the side, tapping her blood-red nails on the chair arm. Mr. Beckett, our family lawyer, opened a thick folder. And then he read the will. All executive authority over Whitmore Technologies, valued at approximately $10 million at the time the will was signed, along with the estate at 934 Alder Lane, shall be transferred to Hazel Whitmore. The room froze. Fiona leapt from her seat like she'd been slapped. "What are you talking about?" she shouted. "I was supposed to inherit the company. I was groomed for this." Mr. Beckett didn't blink. "There is a video recording of Walter's final wishes. And this will was signed in full mental capacity, witnessed and notarized. Fiona was given a trust fund. $700,000. My parents got a wine collection and my grandfather's pocket watch. My father looked like the blood had drained from his body. My mother clutched a monogrammed handkerchief, trembling. But the silence was the loudest sound in the room. That was the day my life changed. But not in the way people think. That was the day my family declared war on me, quietly, slowly, with poisonous smiles and careful sabotage. After the will reading, the air in the mansion grew colder, not literally, but spiritually. Something dark crept into the corners of every room. Staff members I had known since childhood stopped looking me in the eye. The dinner table, once a formality filled with shallow conversation, became a field of tension and silence. The chairs were the same. The china was the same. But the warmth was gone. My father didn't speak to me for the next 2 days. When he did, it was only to say, "You should have told us what Walter was planning. We could have guided the transition." Guided. A word that meant, controlled. I was 25, young, yes, but I wasn't stupid. I didn't respond. I just nodded and walked away. That became my default strategy, calm detachment. I spent hours every morning in Grandpa's study, buried in ledgers, contracts, meeting transcripts, and emails. He'd left notes in the margins of everything, his thoughts on sustainability, his deep mistrust of short-term investors, and even, in a worn-out leather notebook, his vision for a 10-year growth plan. He left behind a blueprint. He had prepared me for this. But what he didn't prepare me for was the depth of my family's betrayal. One afternoon, while reviewing archived contracts, I noticed something strange. Some documents were missing from the filing cabinet. Entire folders on investment partnerships, invoices, and foreign licensing agreements had vanished. I rushed down the stairs and found my father sipping scotch in the lounge. "Where are Grandpa's business files?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He didn't look up. "They're with the auditors. Beckett needed them for the valuation process." Beckett never requested anything. He finally glanced at me, his gaze hollow. "You're overthinking this, Hazel. Learn to trust your family." That sentence hit me like a knife. Trust your family? My fingers curled into fists at my sides, but I said nothing. That night, I went to Grandpa's old safe. The code hadn't changed. Inside, I expected to find what I always had: bonds, key documents, backup USBs. It was nearly empty. Only one envelope remained. A copy of my birth certificate and a note from Grandpa that read, "Keep your mind sharper than their intentions." I didn't sleep that night. I contacted Beckett the next morning, telling him about the missing files and my father's claims. His pause on the phone said everything. "Hazel, if they're trying to challenge the will, their only option is to claim Walter wasn't of sound mind. That's the angle they'd take. You need to be ready." "But he was lucid until the end," I whispered. "I believe that. But they'll do anything to protect what they think is theirs." It wasn't just a warning. It was a prophecy. The next day, I was locked out of the company server. My email access denied. I reached out to the IT team, only to be told that there were new security protocols set in place by upper management, apparently on orders from Fiona. I hadn't even known she was given access. That was my wake-up call. I wasn't in a family. I was in a corporate coup. 3 days later, Peterson, our longtime butler and the only staff member who still showed me kindness, knocked on my door. He looked uncomfortable, twisting his white-gloved hands. "Miss Hazel, your father requests your presence in the formal dining room. 8 a.m. sharp. Everyone will be there." "Why?" I asked. He didn't say. That night, I slept fully dressed, instincts screaming that something terrible was coming. At 7:59 the next morning, I walked into the dining room. White linen stretched across the massive table. Lilies in a crystal vase. A perfectly staged scene. At the head sat my father, flanked by my mother in gray and Fiona in black. Beckett was there, too, but so was a man I didn't recognize. He wore a white coat. A doctor. I didn't sit. "We've gathered today," my father began, "because it's time to revisit your grandfather's will." "I'm not revisiting anything," I said quietly. My mother spoke next, her voice falsely gentle. "Hazel, please. We found some concerning documents. Medical records. Toward the end, your grandfather may have been compromised." The man in the white coat stepped forward. "I've reviewed the medical files provided by the family. They show signs of cognitive decline. It's possible Mr. Whitmore's judgment was impaired." My throat tightened. "Did you ever meet him?" "No," he admitted. "But..." I didn't let him finish. "Then you don't know a damn thing." Fiona spoke up, eyes wide with feigned innocence. "Hazel, no one's trying to take anything from you. We just want to make sure this was all done fairly." Fairly. That word made me sick. My father added, "In light of this, we've filed a petition to challenge the will. The court has agreed to review the case. Until then, your authority is suspended." That was when I stood up, not out of anger, but clarity. I looked at them, one by one. "You're trying to steal from me," I said. "Not because you think I'm unfit. But because I'm finally not silent." My father didn't flinch. "If you won't step down peacefully, we'll make sure the world sees you as unstable." That's when he grabbed my arm. The chair clattered behind me. My mother didn't move. Fiona didn't speak. The doctor looked away. I was dragged out of that house screaming, kicking, and thrown onto the cold steps with a suitcase. Rain pounded my skin. Blood trickled from my scalp. And in my pocket, Grandpa's cracked watch still ticked. I had no home. No power. No money. But I had something they didn't. The truth. And now, I was going to burn down everything they'd built on lies. I spent that first night in the stairwell of a 24-hour laundromat, huddled against a humming dryer, clutching the cracked pocket watch my grandfather left me like it was a life raft. I had nowhere to go. No card, no cash. Only the $47 tucked into the side pocket of my backpack and the busted suitcase tossed at my feet earlier that morning by the very people who once called me daughter. The betrayal wasn't just painful. It was humiliating. But that humiliation lit something in me. Something dangerous. Something sharp. By dawn, I remembered one person, one light still left in the fog. Ashley Carrington. She was my best friend from high school, the only person who ever saw me for more than the quiet Whitmore girl. She'd once stood up for me in gym class when Fiona made fun of my sneakers. We lost touch for a few years after college, but I knew where she lived. I found her address in an old group email thread we had, the kind of digital breadcrumb that betrayers forget still exist. When she opened her apartment door, I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. She took one look at my swollen lip and soaked clothes and pulled me into the warmth of her third-floor walk-up like it was a fortress. For the next 3 days, I barely spoke. I slept on a thin rug with a rolled-up towel for a pillow while Ashley made toast and found me clean socks. She didn't push. She just gave me space. And when I was ready, I told her everything. The will. The boardroom ambush. The doctor with forged reports. The email lockout. The dragging. The bruises. The silence. She listened, curled on the arm of the couch, jaw clenched. "They're monsters," she muttered. "But Hazel, they're powerful monsters. You can't win a war with nothing." "I don't have nothing," I said, reaching into the inside lining of my coat. I pulled out Grandpa's pocket watch. Ashley looked confused. "It's broken." "No," I said softly. "It's a vault." I twisted it exactly as Grandpa had taught me years ago, 2 left, 1 right, hold 3 seconds. A click echoed in the quiet. The back popped open. Inside was a USB drive, small, silver, and labeled with a single word scratched into the plastic, "Legacy." Beneath it, folded into the curve of the hollow chamber, was a note written in Grandpa's unmistakable scrawl. "Hazel, if you've found this, it means they've done what I feared. This USB contains everything: real medical reports, audio recordings, financial statements, and proof of your legal authority. Go to Richard Calloway. 2127, Riverbend Lane, Spokane. Tell him, Walter never trusted shadows." Grandpa. My breath caught. Ashley stared at the note, her eyes widening. "You have a blueprint." "No," I said, standing slowly, strength returning to my spine. "I have a weapon." We took the 6 p.m. bus to Spokane that same night. It rained again, poetic, almost as if the storm was following me, testing me. But this time, I didn't shrink from it. I embraced it. When we arrived, the cabin looked like something from an old novel, rustic, tucked between pine trees, lit only by amber windows glowing behind foggy glass. I was half prepared for rejection, for confusion, for Richard to turn us away. But when he opened the door, he said only 7 words. "Walter said if you came, I'd know." He let us in. Richard Calloway was tall, silver-haired, and lean. A former attorney, now retired, who once served as counsel for Whitmore Technologies before Gregory Beckett took over. He smelled like peppermint and old parchment. In his basement wine cellar, which was actually a hidden document vault, I showed him the USB. He examined it for a long while, then nodded once. "It begins." We spent the next 2 days reviewing the files. Grandpa had recorded everything. There were video logs of strategy meetings, audio clips of him clearly stating his wishes, and a separate folder labeled Redline. Inside were email screenshots of Gregory Beckett and my father, discussing how to restrict my access to the company, how to fabricate a medical opinion, and how to delay probate hearings. Then, tucked away, was the final piece. A PDF scan of a real medical evaluation from Grandpa's personal physician, dated 1 month before his death, affirming that he was of sound mental capacity. Richard stood beside me, reading in silence. "This," he said, pointing to the medical document, "is the kill shot." We reached out to Benjamin Reynolds, a private attorney Walter had mentioned in one of the recordings, the one he said to contact in case Beckett crosses the line. Benjamin arrived within 48 hours. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense. He carried a black briefcase and spoke like he'd argued against the devil himself. "This is fraud," he said after scanning the documents. "Textbook. Coordinated. And now documented. Can we fight them?" He nodded slowly. "Not just fight. We bury them." Richard added, "There's more." I kept Walter's final copy of the advisory board charter. It has a clause that allows an emergency meeting in the event of executive interference. We had it all. The clause. The proof. The money trail. But we needed witnesses. Richard reached out to Martha Jensen, Grandpa's former secretary who had quit abruptly after the funeral. When she saw my face on the screen, she broke into tears. "I knew they'd try something," she whispered. Walter warned me. He said if Hazel ever calls, I'm to testify. I've been waiting. Within 5 more days, we had even more statements from 2 staff members who were fired for refusing to lie. One driver, Colin, admitted they'd asked him to sign a statement saying Grandpa was confused. He refused. Was let go. Another, Peterson, the butler who stood in the corner while I was dragged from the house, submitted a 5-page affidavit describing every second of the incident. Down to the words my father spat at me. We backed it all up. Uploaded it. Printed it. Distributed hard drives between 3 separate banks. When I finally closed the last manila folder, I looked up at Benjamin and said, "Let's go home." And that's when the knock came at the door. A courier. A legal summons. Fiona and my parents had filed a court motion to freeze all estate assets, challenge my mental fitness, and declare the will invalid on the basis of manipulation and undue influence. They were trying to break me before I could even step into court. I stood holding the papers in Richard's living room, hands shaking. But then I felt it, the heavy reassurance in my coat pocket. Grandpa's watch. Still ticking. Still mine. The next morning, Spokane's air was sharp with frost, the kind that cuts straight through wool and bone. But it felt fitting. I needed clarity now, not comfort. We were going to war. Benjamin wasted no time. He filed a counter-motion to enforce the will, attaching everything we had, the real medical report from Grandpa's physician, the audio files, the email screenshots, the advisory board clause. We didn't just send a legal response, we sent a warning. And we didn't stop there. Richard contacted Marcus Shaw, a retired FBI investigator turned private eye, who specialized in white-collar corruption. Within days, Marcus was sending us reports that made my stomach turn, and made me more determined than ever. Fiona, my perfect sister, was drowning in debt. Over $360,000 in gambling losses across casinos in Atlantic City and Vancouver. Credit card advances, backroom markers, and hotel bills paid using corporate accounts under marketing travel expenses. Marcus also traced payments to 2 doctors, both had written reports claiming Grandpa was mentally compromised. And both had received 5-figure deposits from a private trust managed by Hazel Whitmore, my mother. Worse, the same trust had a secondary signer, Gregory Beckett. This wasn't just inheritance tampering. This was fraud, medical manipulation, and embezzlement wrapped in one glittering, rotting bow. Benjamin leaned across the table as he examined the banking transfers. They didn't even try to cover their tracks. Arrogance like this always forgets that paper trails exist. And we weren't done yet. Martha Jensen found an old email from my grandfather, sent just days before his final hospitalization. It read, "If anything happens to me, Hazel is to take everything. She's the only one who understands what I've built. The others may carry my name, but she carries my values. W. Whitmore." The message alone was powerful. But the final blow? Grandpa had secretly recorded a video will. Richard had the flash drive. It was dated, time-stamped, and in perfect clarity, him sitting in his study, suit jacket on, voice steady as a mountain. If anyone contests this, then they were never meant to lead. I am not leaving behind a business, I am leaving behind a code. And Hazel is the keeper of that code. I cried for the first time in weeks. Not from sadness, from vindication. We filed all of it with the court. And then I went silent. Let them scramble. Let them stew. Let them think I was still the scared girl they pushed out with a suitcase and a bruised scalp. During those 3 weeks leading up to the hearing, my phone never stopped buzzing. Fiona called once. I didn't answer. My mother texted a paragraph claiming they only wanted what was fair for the family. I deleted it. Then, one night, Ashley handed me a letter. Courier dropped it off. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note in Fiona's familiar looping script. Hazel. If you're reading this, then the walls are closing in. I don't expect your forgiveness. But I do want to say. I was always jealous of you. You had something I never had, Grandpa's respect. And somehow, you never needed the spotlight to shine. I lost my way. Maybe I never had one. If this is the end, please don't destroy everything. Leave something for me to rebuild with. Fiona. I read it twice. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply folded it and slipped it into a folder labeled Exhibits, Personal Motive. Every piece of their downfall would be documented. Every mask removed. The day before the hearing, we met in Richard's study. Benjamin handed me a black briefcase with gold trim. Inside was every piece of our case: contracts, affidavits, medical reports, transaction logs, audio transcripts, and the video will. And one more thing. A silver Mont Blanc fountain pen, engraved with my initials. Walter meant to give this to you at the company's anniversary gala, Richard said quietly. But now, you'll use it in court. The next morning, the King County Courthouse was flooded with press. Word had spread. The Whitmore family was on trial, not just in legal terms, but in the public eye. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. But I walked past them all, Benjamin at my side, briefcase in hand, a navy blue suit hugging my frame like armor. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Fiona sat stiffly behind her lawyer, in a black dress and pearl earrings, the same ones I'd once given her on her 18th birthday. My mother looked down at her lap the whole time. My father stared ahead, unmoving. Then the judge entered. Eleanor Whitfield. Known for being sharp, unforgiving, and meticulous. She banged the gavel once. This hearing is now in session. The defense went first. Gregory stood and delivered a speech full of slippery language. The updated will was only a draft. Mr. Whitmore was under emotional stress. Hazel was too emotionally close to think objectively. Then Benjamin stood. Calm. Calculated. And deadly. He began with the real medical evaluation. Then moved to recorded conversations where Grandpa detailed his intentions. Then he played the video will. The courtroom fell silent. My grandfather's voice echoed across the chamber. By the time it ended, I could hear someone weeping quietly. I wasn't sure if it was a reporter or one of the jurors. And then came the final nail. The emails. The gambling debts. The doctored records. Benjamin laid it all out like a master conductor guiding an orchestra of facts, ethics, and righteous fire. When he finished, Judge Whitfield took off her glasses and leaned forward. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, the court finds that the original will signed by Walter Whitmore is valid, legal, and binding. Full control of the estate and company shall remain with Hazel Whitmore. Fiona covered her mouth. My mother paled. My father just deflated. Like a balloon losing air. But the judge wasn't finished. The court also finds sufficient evidence to initiate a criminal investigation into Mr. Franklin and Mrs. Lillian Whitmore, as well as attorney Gregory Beckett, on suspicion of fraud, forgery, and unlawful interference in an inheritance dispute. I closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, not because someone told me to, not because I was hiding, but because I felt peace. Real, earned, sacred peace. 3 days after the ruling, I returned to Millbrook Estate not as the discarded daughter, not as a powerless girl with a suitcase, but as its rightful owner. A quiet dignity trailed behind me as I stepped through the towering front doors. The same marble floors that once scraped against my knees as I was dragged out were now polished and waiting for my return. It wasn't celebration I felt. It wasn't even victory. It was reclamation. I didn't storm in or scream. I walked slowly, each step a reminder of the truth. I had survived the storm, and now I controlled the weather. Franklin, Lillian, and Fiona had been given 72 hours to vacate the property. Their personal items were being boxed by court-assigned staff. It was almost surgical, no drama, no yelling. Just silent consequences folding their lives into cardboard. Fiona was the first to approach me. She held a small designer suitcase and wore sunglasses indoors. "You're still keeping the trust fund, right?" she asked. Her voice was small, not weak, but uncertain. Like she didn't know what rules applied anymore. I nodded. "Grandpa wanted you to have it. I won't touch it." She pressed her lips together, almost like she wanted to say thank you, but couldn't form the words. Instead, she just stepped aside. My father came next. Empty-handed. Gray creeping into his beard. His shoulders slumped like the air itself was heavier around him. "I just hope," he said, "that one day, you'll understand why we did what we did." I tilted my head, studying the man who once threw me into the rain. "You did it for power. For control. For ego. That's not family, Dad. That's war. And you lost." He tried to say more, but I raised my hand. "Don't. The will stands. The company's mine. The house is mine. What's left for you is whatever Grandpa left in writing, and nothing more." He didn't argue. He didn't have the right. As they loaded the last of their belongings into 2 dark SUVs, I stood on the front steps of the estate and watched. Not out of cruelty. Not out of revenge. But because I needed to see it end. And when the doors slammed shut and the tires rolled down the long gravel driveway, I turned and walked back into the house, a house that finally felt like mine. But my story wasn't finished. That evening, Benjamin and Richard met me in Grandpa's old study. The fire crackled softly, and the smell of aged paper and leather filled the air like memory. "We've already submitted the evidence package to the prosecutor's office," Benjamin said. "Gregory's license has been suspended. Franklin and Lillian's assets have been frozen pending audit." Richard added, "The advisory board has voted unanimously to reinstate your authority as CEO, no contest. You're not interim anymore." I looked between them. "Then let's start rebuilding," I said. "But not just the company. The standard." We began with the estate. I donated the wine collection to charity. I turned Grandpa's West Wing Library into a scholarship center for underrepresented students in business and finance. I contacted every vendor, partner, and executive my family had neglected or manipulated, and reopened negotiations with transparency and fairness. Whitmore Technologies wasn't just getting a new CEO. It was getting a new soul. I held an emergency shareholder meeting and unveiled a restructuring plan that prioritized ethical tech, green energy, and public education partnerships. No more shell accounts. No more offshore secrecy. No more shady deals masked as philanthropy. The press called it the Whitmore Revival. But I didn't care about the headlines. I cared about the legacy. 1 month later, we launched our first major initiative, Green Pulse, a platform that allowed small and mid-size power plants to track their transition from fossil fuels to solar and wind energy. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Measurable. Needed. That's when I met Jordan Hayes. He was the lead systems engineer on the Green Pulse project, quiet, observant, and refreshingly direct. On our first call, I asked him, "Would you have an issue with quarterly financial audits for your division?" He blinked once, then smiled slightly. "I think ethical audits should be as standard as technical inspections. Both prevent disasters." That answer stayed with me. We worked together closely over the next 6 weeks. No small talk, no posturing. Just honesty. Shared values. Silent trust. One evening, after a late strategy meeting, we found ourselves in the lobby of Whitmore HQ, watching the janitorial team mop the marble floors. Jordan turned to me. You ever think about how easy it would have been to take the money and walk away? I nodded. Every night. But then I remember something Grandpa said. What's that? If you walk away from what's right because it's hard, you leave the wolves to raise the next generation. He looked at me like he'd never heard something so simple carry so much weight. I'm glad you stayed, he said. So was I. I wasn't looking for love. But I was open to respect. Meanwhile, Fiona did something unexpected. She sent a second letter. Hazel. You didn't have to leave the trust intact. But you did. I've started treatment, therapy, debt counseling, even AA. Turns out gambling was the distraction I used to ignore our parents' toxicity. You didn't cut me out. And I want you to know, that matters. If you ever want to see me, I'll be here. Quietly. Fiona. I didn't reply. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I tucked it into the top drawer of my desk, next to Grandpa's fountain pen and a folder labeled Legacy Contracts. I wasn't rebuilding the family tree. I was planting something new. A garden. One where only truth could take root. The days turned to weeks. The company grew stronger, leaner, clearer in its purpose. But even as we rebuilt, the legal aftershocks rippled through the Whitmore name like fault lines under glass. A grand jury began formal investigations into my parents and Gregory Beckett. Gregory's firm tried to spin a PR campaign about misunderstandings in documentation, but the forensic audit proved otherwise. When the laser printer tag on the forged letter was traced directly to his office's machine, the same one used to fabricate Grandpa's supposed reversal of the will, there was no defense left to mount. He was disbarred within days. My mother and father fared no better. The financial fraud was too extensive. Personal accounts showed illegal wire transfers disguised as estate maintenance. A shell company in the Cayman Islands had been used to stash nearly $1.3 million, all of it siphoned from Whitmore Technologies in the final months of Grandpa's life. That money was frozen and ordered to be returned. But no sentence, no audit, no courtroom could ever return what they stole from me emotionally. Still, I stood in every deposition. Calm. Clear. Professional. And when the prosecutor asked why I wasn't pursuing maximum prison time for my family, I answered. Because I believe in accountability. Not vengeance. But I wasn't above poetic justice. With Benjamin's help, we drafted a civil lawsuit that named Lillian and Franklin Whitmore in a class action suit on behalf of the company's minority shareholders, people Grandpa had always protected. For years, those smaller investors had been quietly pushed aside while my parents made deals with backdoor firms and inflated salaries. We opened the books. We exposed every unethical practice. The settlement was massive, enough to bankrupt their remaining assets and blacklist them from boardrooms across the West Coast. Fiona, surprisingly, was not included in the lawsuit. She had taken a step back entirely, issuing a public statement acknowledging her part in the family's collapse and announcing her enrollment in a recovery program for compulsive gambling and financial trauma. When a journalist asked if I planned to reconcile with her, I responded honestly. I don't believe in punishing someone who's trying to heal. I believe in watching them work. Meanwhile, the estate, once a place of shadows and betrayal, was undergoing a transformation. I sold it. Some people were shocked. Why let go of the family home, they asked. Because it wasn't a home. Not anymore. It was a mausoleum of things unsaid. I had no need for echoes. The proceeds, over $3.2 million, were invested into the Walter Whitmore Foundation for Ethical Business, now headquartered in a restored building downtown. The foundation partnered with 5 universities to fund scholarships for first-generation college students studying law, business ethics, and nonprofit leadership. That was Grandpa's real legacy. Not bricks. Not chandeliers. Impact. 1 month later, I gave the keynote address at the foundation's opening gala. I stood at a podium, bathed in warm light, staring out at a crowd of donors, students, and friends. I once believed legacy was something you inherited, I told them. Now I understand, it's something you prove every single day. My grandfather taught me that leadership isn't about dominance. It's about discipline. It's about kindness when no one is watching. About holding the line when everyone else bends. He didn't choose me because I was his favorite. He chose me because I listened. I learned. I refused to become what others tried to make me. I saw Jordan in the back, arms crossed, nodding. I saw Ashley near the front, holding back tears. And in a quiet corner by the exit stood Fiona. She didn't approach me. She didn't wave. But she was there. That was enough. The next morning, I received a letter slipped under my office door. No signature. Just a line of handwritten text in tight cursive. You turned the fire they lit beneath you into a lighthouse. Thank you. It was Fiona. I didn't need confirmation. I just placed the note next to the first one she sent, and moved forward. Jordan and I continued working closely together. What started as cautious collaboration became something deeper. He didn't flatter. He didn't chase. He simply stood beside me, thoughtful, attentive, never trying to fix me. One evening after a Green Pulse pitch meeting, we took a walk along the waterfront. The sky was streaked with violet and gold. The kind of dusk that makes you forget the world was ever cruel. I've worked with a lot of leaders, he said. But none who were this steady. I smiled. Steady took time. I had to fall first. He looked at me, serious. You're not still falling? No, I said softly. I'm flying now. But I remember the fall. That's what keeps me honest. We stood there, silent. No rush. No labels. Just a new beginning. That weekend, I returned to Spokane. Richard still lived in the same cabin. Still made the same tea. Still asked the same question, what did you learn this week? I told him about the foundation, the lawsuits, Fiona's letter. Then I pulled out Grandpa's pocket watch. I'd had the crack repaired, but left the dent in the side untouched. This stays with me, I said. No matter what. He nodded. It should. We walked out into the forest behind his cabin, where the pines whispered through the wind like old stories refusing to die. At the edge of a small clearing stood a granite headstone, simple and strong. Walter Whitmore. He saw through the smoke. He chose the flame. I knelt beside it, placing white daffodils at its base, the ones Grandpa always said reminded him of beginnings. I did it, Grandpa, I whispered. Not just the company. The integrity. It's safe. Just like you wanted. The breeze picked up, rustling the trees. I closed my eyes and let it pass through me. He wasn't gone. He was just quiet now. But I had learned how to listen. 6 months after the courtroom verdict and 3 since the Whitmore Foundation's official launch, I found myself in a place I never imagined I'd reach, peace. Not the fragile, temporary kind that collapses at the sound of a name or a bad memory. No. This was earned peace. The kind that arrives only after the fires have burned, the ashes have cooled, and the truth has been spoken aloud. The Whitmore Technologies headquarters now looked different, not just physically, but spiritually. The executive floor had been redesigned, open glass replacing dark wood walls, transparency now more than a concept. The old power symbols, the grandfather paintings, the private wine bar, were gone. In their place? Community maps, sustainability dashboards, rotating art from local schools, and a plaque that read, "The Walter Standard, Profit with Integrity." One morning, during a routine strategy check-in, Jordan brought coffee to my office and paused by the window. "They said in the last quarterly review that you've increased the company's shareholder trust rating by 47%, he said. You know that's unheard of in this climate, right? I smiled. It's not magic. It's accountability. He leaned on the windowsill, watching the city below. What's next? I looked at him. And then I looked at the stack of proposal letters for new partnerships, internship programs, and international grants. But none of that was what came to mind. Next? I said. I go back to the beginning. I drove to Lakewood later that weekend, not to visit the estate, which had since been sold to a family with 3 kids and a Labrador, but to revisit something more personal. The old summer camp. The one I used to write about in my college essays. The one where I taught kids how to code using borrowed laptops and dusty tables with no air conditioning. I hadn't been back in over a decade. But the moment I arrived, everything came rushing back. The gravel paths. The old flagpole. The echoes of laughter and possibility. I met with the director and offered a donation through the foundation, not just money, but equipment, volunteer hours, and a full curriculum designed by our software team. She cried when she saw the proposal. You were one of our quiet ones, she said. But I always knew you were watching. I said. And now I'm ready to give back. That night, back in Seattle, I found myself standing at the foot of my bed, holding a single envelope. It had arrived earlier that day with no stamp, hand-delivered. Inside was a card. Hazel. They say you can't rewrite history. But you did something better. You rewrote our future. F. There was a return address this time. A rehab center just outside Portland. I placed the card in the drawer beside her first letter. Not to forget. But to remember the cost of silence and the power of one voice. Weeks passed. Then months. One morning I sat with Ashley on the rooftop of our new office building, sipping hot chocolate under the early fall sun. You know what's wild, she said, tucking her knees under her. They almost won. Yeah, I said. But they didn't. She paused. Did you ever think, if Grandpa hadn't left that USB? I shook my head. He didn't just leave me the USB. He left me something more important. What? Belief. In me. In doing the right thing when it's the hardest thing. Ashley looked at me for a long time. You know what I think? What? You're not the quiet girl in the corner anymore. I smiled. No. Now I'm the one standing at the center, building the kind of world I never got to grow up in. And I meant it. Because everything they took from me, the dignity, the safety, the trust, I rebuilt on my own terms. My family once cast me out with nothing but a cracked watch and a broken name. But in the end, they couldn't break me. They only revealed who I truly was. And the woman I became? She didn't just recover. She redefined everything. Hazel's story reminds us that power built on lies will always collapse, but truth, even when buried deep, finds its way back to the surface. When silence is broken, when dignity is reclaimed, when justice is pursued, a new legacy is written. Hazel didn't just take back what was stolen. She showed us that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, because when they finally speak, they change everything. What would you have done in Hazel's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true-inspired stories from Revenge Echoes, where every betrayal births a reckoning.